So today, we're diving into something. Well, it's fascinating, but also, frankly, a bit unnerving. It's the book Your Face Belongs to Us by Kashmir Hill. We've looked at interviews, presentations by the author, all that good stuff.
Yeah, trying to synthesize the main takeaways for you, the listener, without making it feel like homework.
Right. And this topic, privacy. It just feels like it's shifting under our feet constantly, doesn't it? Especially with our digital lives, our data, our faces even.
Oh, absolutely. Our faces are increasingly becoming just another data point. Collected, stored, analyzed. It's a huge change.
And this book really zeroes in on one company at the heart of it, Clearview AI. They're based in New York.
And their main thing, their core tech, it's this facial recognition app. But the way they built it, that's the kicker.
Yeah, they didn't necessarily invent some brand new algorithm from scratch, did they? It was more about the data collection.
Exactly. They scraped billions, literally billions of photos from all over the public internet. Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, even Venmo, apparently.
Billions. It's hard to even picture that scale.
It really is. They basically vacuumed up the visual internet to build this massive face database.
So the app itself, how does it work for the user?
Well, it's pretty simple on the surface. You take a photo of someone, anyone upload it, and the app searches its database to find other pictures of that same person online.
And that can link to, what,
Yeah.
names, social media?
Potentially, yes. Names, different profiles, maybe where they work, if it links to LinkedIn, maybe even location clues, connections, all from one photo.
So for you listening, think about that. Every public photo you're tagged in, or even just appears online, could be part of this. It kind of redefines what public means, doesn't it?
It completely reframes it. Your online presence becomes instantly searchable, visually, anonymity in public spaces. That suddenly feels, well, fragile.
And here's a key part of the early story. They weren't exactly shouting this from the rooftops at first.
No, definitely not. They operated pretty quietly, selling the tech mainly to law enforcement agencies. There wasn't much public knowledge about it initially.
It sounds like something straight out of, CSI or one of those shows.
Yeah.
Instant Face ID.
Right. But this wasn't fiction. It became a real tool used by police, which obviously brought up a whole host of, well, really serious questions.
Big questions about surveillance, privacy, consent.
All of it. And the ethics of using a database built like this, often without anyone's explicit permission for this kind of use.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea Kashmir Hill calls ethical arbitrage. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's a really key concept in the book. The idea isn't that Clearview had some kind of unique technological magic nobody else had. It was more about their willingness to do something others wouldn't.
Like who? Who held back?
Well, the big players. Think Google, think Facebook. They absolutely had the technical chops to build something similar, to identify strangers from photos.
Right. I remember reading, wasn't it Eric Schmidt at Google, like way back in 2011?
Yeah, exactly. He was chairman then, and he said publicly that Google had the tech but decided to hold back on using it for identifying strangers. Too creepy, basically. That was the implication.
And Facebook too.
Apparently so. Hill mentions Facebook engineers around 2017 demoed an internal app that could, identify people in a room just by pointing a phone camera at them. But again, they didn't release it. Probably saw the potential backlash.
So Clearview comes along and says,
Well, they essentially said, this data is publicly available online. We can scrape it. This facial recognition tech works. We can apply it. They were willing to connect those dots where others hesitated because of the ethical implications, the privacy concerns.
that's the arbitrage part, exploiting that gray area.
Pretty much. They saw a gap between what was technically possible and what major companies were ethically comfortable doing publicly, and they stepped into it, gathering the data, using the tech, pushing those boundaries.
Got it. Okay, so who is behind Clearview? Let's talk about the founder who went on that.
Yeah. Right. His background is interesting. Not exactly deep state security or anything. He was more on the consumer tech side.
Like what?
Well, he'd made Facebook games, some iPhone apps. He was kind of a serial tech entrepreneur type, apparently. Moved from Australia to San Francisco, chasing the boom.
Okay, so a tech guy. How does he end up building this massive surveillance tool?
Well, the story goes, he eventually moved to New York. His politics apparently shifted somewhat, more conservative circles, and he connected with this guy, Charles Johnson.
Ah, okay. And the idea sparked where?
The book points to the 2016 Republican National Convention. Johnson apparently describes being there, seeing crowds, and thinking, wouldn't it be useful to know who these people are?
Huh. So the genesis was potentially political identification?
That's the reported origin, yeah.
Yeah.
Identifying people in crowds at a political event. And it was around then they also met Peter Thiel.
The Peter Thiel, who became an investor.
That's the one. Thiel ended up investing in Clearview, which, adds another layer given his views on technology and society.
So they had the idea, the tech, the backing. Who did they try to sell it to first? Was it always law enforcement?
Not initially, no. They apparently pitched it to hotels, maybe retail stores, for things like identifying VIP customers or, loss prevention, standard commercial stuff.
But that didn't quite take off.
It seems law enforcement became the main market. That's where they found real
Yeah.
attraction.
Okay, let's get into that. The law enforcement use. This was initially secret, right?
Largely, yeah. They were signing up hundreds of police departments across the U.S., kind of under the radar. And the police who used it, many were apparently very enthusiastic.
Why? What was the appeal?
It worked, or at least it seemed to work really well on cases that were stuck. We heard anecdotes, detectives with cold cases, they'd run a grainy photo through Clearview and suddenly get leads, matches, where older systems failed.
Any specific examples?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security, specifically ICE, used it, reportedly for child crime investigations. The idea was matching faces in horrific abuse material to online profiles to identify victims and sometimes perpetrators.
Okay, so you can see the argument there. A powerful tool for terrible crimes.
Absolutely. There's a potential benefit argument, definitely. But then you have to weigh that against the risks, the downsides.
What are?
Huge. The potential for misuse, for mistakes, for false arrests. And those aren't just theoretical. They've happened.
Tell me about that.
Well, there's this awful case Hill documented. An 8 months pregnant woman, falsely arrested for carjacking, based entirely on a bad facial recognition match.
Oh my God, that's horrifying.
It is. And it wasn't an isolated incident. There's another case, Randall Corin Reed, arrested, put in jail for a week. Why?
Let me guess. Bad match.
Bad match. Linked him to a larceny in Louisiana, a state the guy said he'd never even been to.
A week in jail based on an algorithm's mistake.
Exactly. These cases just hammer home how dangerous errors can be, especially when liberty is on the line. And it highlights the accuracy issues.
Which brings up the whole bias problem too, right? We have heard about that with facial recognition for years.
Yes, historically a major issue. Algorithms trained on non-diverse data sets were often much less accurate for people of color, for women.
Has that gotten better?
It has improved, yeah, largely thanks to criticism and, efforts to use more diverse training data. But issues persist. Accuracy isn't perfect for anyone, and it can still struggle, especially with poor quality images, like from a blurry CCTV camera. That's the probe photo.
And the false arrests you mentioned.
Disturbingly, all the publicly known cases of false arrests based solely on facial recognition in the U.S., they've involved Black individuals. Every single one.
Wow. So even if overall accuracy improves, the consequences of errors can fall unevenly.
Precisely. And some activists argue, look, focusing only on bias, while important, kind of misses the bigger picture. The danger isn't just bias surveillance, it's pervasive surveillance itself, even if it becomes perfectly accurate for everyone. Do we want that world?
That's a heavy question. And it's not just police using it, is it? What about the private sector?
Right. Clearview initially tried selling to them, but there have been other instances. The Madison Square Garden example is pretty stark.
What happened there?
MSG Entertainment used facial recognition, reportedly, Clearview, though they later disputed which system to identify and ban lawyers from law firms that were suing them. They scraped photos from the firm's own websites.
Seriously. So you sue them, you can't go to a Knicks game or a concert.
That was the reality for some. It shows how corporations could use this to, track people, maybe even discriminate based on who they are or who they associate with. It's not just about crime.
It really makes you think about anonymity disappearing. Like just walking around, going shopping.
Exactly. Imagine a future where every interaction, every purchase could be linked back to your identity instantly because your face was scanned. Does that change how you act, how you interact?
Probably. And Clearview isn't alone now, right? You mentioned other public search engines.
Yeah, that's another layer. Tools like PimEyes, facecheck.id, they offer similar face searching capabilities, and they're available to basically anyone online, often for a fee.
So it's not just governments or big companies anymore. Anyone could potentially use this stuff.
Pretty much. Hill includes this kind of disturbing anecdote about a PimEyes user who had a self-described privacy kink. He used it to find the real names and identities of women performing in online porn.
Okay, that's creepy.
Yeah.
And incredibly invasive.
Right. It just shows the potential for misuse is incredibly broad once the technology is out there and accessible.
So with all this going on,
Mhm.
what are governments doing? How are they responding? Is anyone regulating this?
Well, it's really a mixed bag globally. There's a big difference between the US and, say, Europe or Canada or Australia. In those places, Europe, Canada, Australia privacy regulators looked at Clearview's model, scraping billions of faces without consent, and said, nope, that's illegal.
Illegal based on what?
They're privacy laws. GDPR in Europe, similar laws elsewhere, they basically require consent to collect and use biometric data like face scans. You can't just scrape it for one purpose and then use it for a completely different one like perpetual identification without permission.
So what happened to Clearview there?
They were essentially told to stop, find, and, effectively kicked out in terms of operating their database on citizens of those countries.
Okay, but the U.S.
It's different. We don't have a single overarching federal privacy law like GDPR. It's more state by state.
Like Illinois, I've heard they have a strong one.
Exactly. Illinois has BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act. It's one of the strongest, giving people more control over their biometric data. California also has consumer privacy laws, CCPA and now CPRA, which let residents ask companies, including Clearview, what data they have and request deletion.
So Clearview faced lawsuits here too.
Oh, yeah. And as a result of legal settlements, particularly one with the ACLU, Clearview agreed to stop selling its main database to private companies in the U.S. They can now only sell to government entities, primarily law enforcement.
But that's because of lawsuits, not a federal law saying you can't do this.
Correct. It's a patchwork. The restrictions came from legal action based on existing state laws, not a comprehensive federal framework designed specifically for facial recognition.
It feels complicated.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit behind the curve.
That's a fair assessment. The technology often moves faster than the regulation.
So if regulation is patchy, what can individuals even do? Is there any way to protect yourself? Feels kind of hopeless, honestly.
It does feel daunting, yeah. Because we leave digital footprints everywhere. Setting your Facebook to private, okay, maybe helps going forward. But Clearview scraped historical data, too, stuff that was public at some point.
I remember Kashmir Hill mentioned she tried using a flip phone for a while.
She did, yeah. But even she framed it more as an experiment against smartphone addiction and constant data generation, not really a foolproof way to avoid facial recognition databases. If your photo is online anywhere, it could potentially be scraped.
So individual actions are limited.
Limited feels like the right word. Real change probably needs to come from stronger regulations. State level, maybe eventually federal, setting clear rules about collecting, using, and sharing facial data.
And the tech isn't standing still, is it? You mentioned Clearview working on glasses.
Augmented reality glasses, yeah. That's reportedly something they're exploring. Imagine putting on glasses and instantly seeing information about the people around you based on facial recognition.
Whoa, that's Minority Report territory.
It's getting closer than maybe we think, and it just ramps up the privacy questions exponentially. How would society function if anonymity truly disappears in public?
It seems like people react differently, though, right? Some places might be more accepting than others.
Definitely. Public opinion varies. Some people are more comfortable maybe trusting the authorities or seeing the benefits for safety. Others are deeply concerned about the potential for abuse and the loss of privacy. It's not a uniform reaction.
And we should probably remember those early motivations, too, the political angle at the RNC.
Right. The context of its development is relevant. And legally, Clearview has tried to argue First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, to justify scraping public data.
How does that work?
The argument is complex, but essentially claiming a right to gather public information. But that's been challenged, with opponents bringing up cases like NAACP v. Alabama, where the Supreme Court protected the privacy of association, saying groups didn't have to reveal member lists because it could chill free association. There's a tension there.
Privacy versus access to information. It's a tough balance.
It's a very tough balance.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, the book, Your Face Belongs to Us, it really pulls back the curtain on this incredibly powerful tech through the Clearview story.
Yeah, it shows just how potent facial recognition has become and how quickly it can erode traditional ideas of privacy, almost without us noticing until it's already happened.
There's that undeniable tension, isn't there? The potential good-solving crimes, finding exploited kids.
Versus the huge risks: misuse, bias, false arrests, chilling effects, the loss of anonymity. It's a massive trade-off.
It really forces you, the listener, to think about what kind of future we want with this technology
Mm.
and the urgency of having a real conversation about rules and regulations.
Before it becomes completely ubiquitous and maybe irreversible.
So maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is this. As this tech gets better and spreads, what does anonymity even mean anymore? And if it vanishes, what are the real long-term consequences?
That's the question, isn't it? Definitely something worth pondering and maybe digging into the book itself for anyone wanting the full, detailed story. It's a crucial conversation for our times.